further unique for us. My name is Malcom Koch. I'm in the political science faculty, and this program is jointly sponsored by the American Security Project, and these are our guests from the American Security Project, and also from the International Security Studies program, which is part of both political science and international studies. We'll start with some very brief introductions, and hopefully if you have one of these, and this is also information on our speakers. The person who we start with, General Castellaw, who is an ag graduate of 1972, and I feel like I've introduced him a few times, but he's had some very significant commands in the Marine Corps, including Marine Corps Aviation. He was Chief of Staff of the Central Command, for those of you who know how commands our military are organized, and he was also the equivalent of the Chief Financial Officer of the Marine Corps. It's been my pleasure to get to know General Adams briefly this evening. And General Adams was an undergraduate at North Carolina State. He has several master's degrees, including a master's in international relations from Boston University. One of the things that we were able to talk about briefly before coming over here was how he was a foreign area officer in the Army, and was also military attaché, equivalent in a number of countries around the world. Just highlights what we are trying to talk about, is how military careers, many military careers, have a very large international dimension to them. And he is currently getting very near a PhD from the University of Arizona, and just has finished up all of his coursework and his generals, and is now having the fun time of writing the dissertation. The third person on our panel, and the person who will speak to you first, is Andrew Holland. And Andrew Holland is a senior fellow at the American Security Project. Both General Castellaw and General Adams, by the way, are on the board of the American Security Project. UT Martin is an official university partner of the American Security Project. And we have had 2 interns there. Andrew, this is his second trip to UT Martin. He was on an earlier panel. I don't know if any of you participated in that, when we did a panel on job creation and renewable energy in Northwest Tennessee. And so he made he's getting to be an old timer in Tennessee now, getting to know his way around the state. But Andrew was an undergraduate at Wake Forest and was a graduate student in Scotland. And his first job was working for Senator Hagel, who is Senator Hagel, incidentally, and Senator Kerry at the time were both founding directors of the American Security Project. So he worked in Hagel's office, and then has moved over and has been for a number of years with the American Security Project, where he is a senior fellow on issues of on energy and climate change. So please join me in welcoming these people. We're extremely fortunate to have them all here today.
Well, that's a nice round of applause to start, and thanks, Malcolm. Thanks to all of you for your hospitality in having us here. I don't know if I'm becoming an old hand yet Tennessee. I haven't figured out the best local ribs joint or anything, but I'm gonna have to work on that. The way we're gonna run this tonight is first I'm gonna give you a quick introduction on the American Security Project, what it is that we do, and then I'm gonna run down why we care about this, why the American Security Project, the national security think tank, is here talking to you about climate change, and that's some liberal, hippie, environmentalist issue. Why are two generals here talking about it? And then I'm going to run through a little bit of the science. I'll preface it by saying that I'm not a scientist, and I know we have some people, some of your eminent staff in the room here who are probably better qualified than I am to be talking about it. But just to give you a kind of a brief overview, and then I'm going to turn it over to General Castellaw first, and then General Adams, and they're going to run through why it is the military cares about this left-wing hippie environmentalism, and then what they see are coming up as some threats and some issues and some things for you all, especially the young people here in the audience, to be thinking about and looking forward to, and or not looking forward to. ASP, as Malcolm said, we were founded almost a decade ago now by a bipartisan coalition of senators, former senators, other retired politicians, business people, and senior retired officers from all branches of the military. Our founding idea is to take politics out of national security and return to the facts. Look at a number of issues and talk about it from a fact-based analysis first. Politics gets involved after that, but let's all start from the same place on facts, and then we can let the chips fall where they do. But we shouldn't have Republican facts and Democratic facts. As Malcolm said, I work for Senator Hagel. I come out of Republican politics. Other of my colleagues come out of Democratic politics, and we disagree some, as you would expect. But if you're starting from the same facts, then that's an important way to start. Here are some of our founders and our board members and everything. You can see this is quite a group, and we're proud to be with them. So why climate change? And I'm not going to read these quotes out. I think that's the worst thing to do on a PowerPoint, is to put up a big long quote and then directly read it. But what you can see from these is that these are serious people thinking about this and looking deep into climate change. Isn't just something that polar bears think about. This isn't something that we should just worry about for saving the rainforest or for some cute animals. This is a national security issue, and as Senator Kerry recently said, perhaps the world's most fearsome weapon of mass destruction. I think you'd find that a lot of these guys would share their talking points from some of ASP's report. And I would encourage you to go on our website, AmericanSecurityProject.org, which you'll see on every slide up here, and look through some of our reports. Because I think this gives you a clear statement that climate change, caused largely by burning of fossil fuels, is real, and its effects are already affecting America's national security. We know that while climate change may not directly cause conflict, it will influence many of the underlying insecurities that make conflict more likely. And you'll hear from our generals here that climate change is a threat in security because it's what we call a threat multiplier. Already driving internal and cross-border migration, opening new areas like the Arctic, creating new problems, and also new threats to homeland security. This isn't some problem that we should just think about going on around the world. Some problem in already unstable places like the Middle East, this is a problem that's going to hit us right here at home. Already is hitting us right here at home. So, I think it's useful to start out with just the facts about climate change. So let's start with the greenhouse effect. We've understood, the scientists have understood the greenhouse effect since 19th century scientists like Tyndall and Readiness. And we should realize we would not be here if it wasn't for greenhouse gases. The Earth would be like Mars, cold in the dark, hot in the sun. We keep the heat in because we have a layer of greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, the various other greenhouse gases, mostly CO2. But like anything, too much of a good thing causes changes. So, hasn't the climate always changed? You can look at this, and this is the global temperatures, CO2 concentration, and sea level for the last 450,000 years. And yes, the climate has always changed. It's the first thing everybody always says to me. Oh, hasn't the climate always changed? Well, yes, the climate has always changed. And you can see this based on that. But I would put to you, it hasn't for the last 8,000 years. And you can see from this, this is reconstructed sea level rise. But you can also see there's a whole number of other temperatures and all that sort of stuff. You can reconstruct this. And for the last 8,000 years, it's been remarkably stable. Now, what's happened in those 8,000 years? Agriculture, human settlements, arts, cities, literature, states, empires, and most importantly, a population of humans that has gone from 5 million people to 7 billion people. So that's quite a change. But what I'd say to you is that stability is ending. This is the last 2,000 years. This is the famous hockey stick graph that was supposedly debunked, but has now been rebunked. And this is the reconstructed temperature record for the last 2,000 years. It is true. This happened. This is the way it happens. And as you can see, it was gradually trending downward with a clear upward spike since the 1950s. So I would put to you that this period of stability is ending. So here are the facts. The Earth is warming. And you can see on this. At any point there, you can cherry pick some dates that will find a downward or flat progression. But again, the trend from 1970 to the present is a clear upward trend. The warmest decade on record was the 2000s, with each decade before that being warmer than the last. This is a clear trend. This is real, and these are facts. What's even more scary is that most of the warming that is being trapped by greenhouse gases is going into the oceans. You can see this, the red there below is the warming that's happening in the atmosphere that I showed you in the previous graphs. The two blue charts is all the warming that's going into the ocean. So this is something that's happening even faster and faster than we thought. Why is the temperature increasing? Again, we've understood the greenhouse gas effect for 150 years. The temperature is increasing because there is an increasing concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Now, there are certain things we don't understand about this. We don't understand the sensitivity of them. We don't understand how much more we can put in and how much temperature that will have. But I would put to you that any argument that anybody gives you that this is not because of greenhouse gases is a political argument. It's not a fact-based argument. It's set to meet a political end. And like I said, I've come out of Republican politics. We should be talking about solutions instead of facts. This is, again, another interesting thing. Temperatures we think should be declining. The blue would be with natural forces only. People say, oh, models haven't done very well. Here's a model done by James Hansen, famous NASA scientist, who you may have heard of, has testified before Congress a bunch of times. He's a big guy on there. As you can see, his model is below, done in 1978, I think it was. That's a long enough time period to start to see a trend. You can see that he actually predicted it below it. It's not the sun. You know, when you start hearing, oh, what else could it be? Well, it's not the sun. Look at the blue line. Is that the sun's strength has gone down while temperatures have gone up. So, with that, I would say the military worries about climate change. Again, here's a long quote. You guys can come back and look at it on our website at any time. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to General Castellaw, who's going to tell us more about this.
Well, thank you, Andrew. You know, this is April. Let's see, school ends in May, is that right? Well, 42 years ago, I was going through one of the most stressful periods in my life. I was a senior, like this young lady down front, and I just got married, and I had orders to Quantico to begin my career, which I thought would be only 3 years, as a Marine. And you know, you're supposed to, once you get married and everything, your brain's supposed to light up, and you're supposed to be a lot smarter and everything, so. I had a buddy of mine that talked me into, I was ag, majored my degrees in agriculture from here at UT Martin. I had a buddy that talked me into taking genetics, pre-med genetics. And I didn't do that well in animal genetics, and so I guess I should have been a little smarter on that. So you had 3 exams during the quarter. We were on quarters then. And you had to have a 50 to get a D in pass. And I said, hey, piece of cake, I could do this. I just got married. I'm smarter. And, so I go and I take the first of the 3 exams, and I get a 46 on it. I said, damn. So I said, I got to do better than this. So next time I really studied hard, you know, and man, I'm going to get this. So prof posts the score, 42. Okay, 50 average, okay, 46 and 42. It took me 2 years to get through math too, so I'll let you do the numbers. So I go see the professor and I say, hey, you know, I just got married, you know, I'm going to have to start producing something, and I got orders to Quantico. I'm supposed to report there in July, and, you know, how about helping me out a little? He looked up at me and said, get the hell out of here, sink or swim on your own, boy. So I go study real hard, really hard, and I take the last exam. I think, you know, I need to make it 70 or something on it. And I go in to see the prof, and I said, how did I do? And he said, 49 and a half. I'll round it up. I passed with a D. Of course, I think he gave it to me. But I went on to Quantico, and, you know, I got my degree in agriculture and commissioned in the Corps, and I told my beautiful wife, I said, honey, 3 years and we're back on the farm. Well, it took 36 years to get back to the farm. But I'm back in Crockett County now, and it's always a pleasure to come up here and interact with the students and the faculty. And Colonel Ted Mosh back there, I don't know if many of you know, he's not teaching anymore, but he was my political science teacher here when I was a student, colonel in the Army Reserves, and has been a lifelong friend, so it's always good to see you, Ted. And in front of him is my former brother-in-law, Tim. Good to have you here. So, you know, as I look out in the crowd, I see others, Todd and Nick and Ross back there. Thanks for coming out tonight and listening to what we may have to say. You know, Andrew talked about the military and how we look at things. And again, I don't think it's all that much different than how businesses and others look at it. Okay? Because we were at FedEx just today, and they were talking to us about what they were doing to reduce their carbon footprint, their emissions and everything. And they put up a very interesting graph. And they were very proud of the fact that their emissions were going down. But they were even more proud of the fact, in inverse proportion to the decline in emissions, their revenues were going up. And so in the military, just like in business, what it's about is what is good for the organization, what is good for the mission. The mission of the United States military is to defend this great nation of ours and to do it in the most efficient and effective manner while preserving the most precious of our resources, which are the blood of the men and women who serve. And so there are two groups of Americans that are especially dear to me. The first group is the military, and the second group is rural America. And there's a connection between it, because 40% of all those who serve in the military come from rural areas. They come from Crockett County, Weakley, they come from Obion, they come from counties in East Tennessee and West and Middle Tennessee and Western Kentucky and so forth. But it is very important that those of us who are put in leadership positions do the best we can, not to save the red cockaded woodpecker, but to do the mission with the least amount of loss of that precious blood. And how we look at it is we have a great ability to analyze what's going on and to look around and take information and do what we call intelligence preparation of the battlefield, to get all the information and facts, and then once we have that, then make decisions. 70% certainty is about what we need in order to send men and women in harm's way, 70%. And so as I looked around and traveled during my tours as a Marine and in joint commands as well as, and I saw all these situations, and my requirement was to look at them and to think how we were going to deal with it. Andrew talked about accelerators. Climate is a very clear accelerator of conflict. Syria is in the news just about every day now. A terrible situation, hundreds of thousands of people killed. And what we see on the surface is a sectarian conflict between Sunnis and various other sects in Syria. But one of the accelerators that poured gasoline on that fire was the fact that for an extended period of time, Syria had drought, its ability to produce crops was diminished. You had the flow of people from rural areas to the cities, Aleppo and some of those others that you hear about, where their presence contributed to the conflict, to the clash between the various elements that were there. I'll always remember, I did a lot of traveling when I was Chief of Staff at CENTCOM to a lot of the Mideast countries, and one of the countries I visited fairly often was Jordan. You know, and I'm an old Baptist from Crockett County, and I grew up in little church where all of us are kin to each other, Marcus Chapel Baptist Church, and you know, it had the Sunday school room, and in one of those rooms was a little painting of the River Jordan. And it was a big river because, you know, everybody's getting dunked, as a, you know, from a Baptist viewpoint, baptized in the river. And so when I went to Jordan, one of the things I wanted to see was the Jordan River. Just to go down and look at it and recall what I had seen on that wall in that Sunday school classroom. And I go down there, and the Jordanians take me because I'm coming in from that side. I'm just across from Israel, and the river is not as wide as from here to the wall. Water is being pulled out of it, and at the same time, climate is having an impact on it. And that is one of the major sources of water between potential enemies in that part of the country. It can be an accelerator. It can pour gas on the fire. It can be a contributor to conflict. So what the military wants to do is reduce the risk of those particular flashpoints requiring us to be involved in. So just like FedEx, FedEx wants the revenue to go up. What we in the military, we want our mission of effectiveness to go up. And so how we do it is also look at how we can reduce our carbon footprint, what we're putting out. I'll always remember, some of you probably heard me talk about, say this story before. I was on top of Aditha Dam in western Iraq, and I was watching a convoy of Marines come into the secure area. And it was Humvees and what we call MRAPs, which were heavy iron vehicles that we were trying to use to protect people in. And they're coming around a corner, and just as they came around the corner, one of the biggest explosions I've ever seen in my life goes off. Improvised explosive device. And the billowing black cloud, debris is flying everywhere. And I thought the worst. Fortunately, the Humvees and the MRAPs come out of the cloud, and there was just a little wounded, nobody killed, luckily, that time. But 7 out of 10 of those convoys in Iraq and in Afghanistan are carrying gas and water. Contributors to our footprint. So what we're doing today is reducing the risk to those individuals that were in that situation. You're seeing portable windmills, backpack solar panels. You're seeing us as we get our line and mission accomplishment going up, that we're also, like FedEx, reducing our emissions and trying to make sure that we control the risk that we subject those people to. And the bottom line is, it's all about doing the mission and keeping the people. And we have the best, right now, military we have ever had. And I will always remember, I was walking through, I spent a lot of time still in D.C., and I was going to my airplane at one of the gates in Washington National. And as I was walking toward the gate, I looked up and I saw a individual coming toward me with his family. Beautiful wife, a little child. And he was walking on 2 metal pipes and had 1 metal arm. He only had 1 arm left. And he was wearing a t-shirt that said, "I had a blast in Afghanistan." Those are the type of people that we have serving in the military of the United States. Those who are willing to go out and suffer those type of injuries, risk their lives, and at the same time retain that spirit that allows them to continue on with their life even after such a grievous wound. And I think it's our part, those of us who lead, those of us who support, to make sure that we do everything to moderate the risk and make sure that we do the best we can, so that we can reduce the amount of time that we send them in harm's way. I think I'm going to stop warbling for a little bit and turn it over to my partner, General Adams. You know, Marines and soldiers don't agree on much, but John and I agree on this. Over to you, my friend.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, General Castellaw, and thank you, Andrew, and thanks especially to y'all for being here tonight. It's really a privilege to be here. The military looks at climate change as a practical issue, and that's how we should look at it. We are about readiness. We're about getting ready for the next battle and for the next battle space. And there is a next battle space. No matter what you think about climate change in terms of the science, I happen to agree with the science that Andrew presented, but from the military standpoint, what's important is we have to study the battle space and then prepare to operate on it. And the military is doing that. They're doing that actively. All of the services have programs to prepare to operate in a different climate tomorrow than there is today, and the climate today is different from the one yesterday. And you're all familiar with the difference between weather and climate. And we obviously are interested in the weather. Y'all interested in that very much because you have your share of severe weather that you have to prepare for. Well, I'm from the Florida Gulf Coast, and we have severe weather too. In fact, I would say, if you really want to study severe weather, come and live on my beach. And the point is this, I was here today, and my wife was in Gulf Breeze, Florida, just outside Pensacola, for those of you who may know where that is. They had some terrible winds today, and the sky was black. We didn't have a hurricane. We might have had a tornado, because there was a tornado watch. Y'all probably know those things too right here. But it's a concern. So we look outside, and we see how black the sky is, and we can watch the weather report. We can see, hey, you know, I got a weather radio. We're tracking this thing. But I would argue the most important thing we can do is every time we have a storm is learn from it. Learn from the weather. Understand that it's going to come back, and we got to get ready for it the next time. I'll bring it back to the military for just a second. The battle space, the place in which the United States military has to operate, is changing. A couple examples of that. The Arctic ice cap is disappearing. For the Navy, that's a big deal. Now they have to operate in a new place. The polar ice cap, which before was ice and now is open water. They got to prepare for that. What does that require? Of course it requires different kind of training, a different kind of formation for the Navy. It requires a certain amount of different equipment. Now instead of having to operate in an ice environment, they got to operate in open sea. And oh, by the way, they better have the right ships to do that in, and they better have the right fleet to operate that in, or they won't be ready for it. Because there's other countries that notice that too. And in some ways that's an opportunity for commerce, but in other ways it's a challenge that they got to prepare for. And perhaps it's going to be an area of combat operations. It's certainly an area that we have to be prepared to operate within. And that's what I mean by changing battle space and being prepared for it. And it requires not only training and a different kind of operation sometimes, but it also means that we have to forecast the forces we need, and that takes a lot of time to prepare a force structure for the new battle space. It also takes a long time to acquire the right kinds of equipment to operate in these new climatic conditions. General Castellaw talked a little bit about a couple of areas of instability that are affected because climate change is an accelerant of instability. So it may not be directly responsible for producing ethnic conflict or producing conflict of whatever kind, but it certainly is an accelerant of those things that cause or that can lead to more conflict. And I'll just give you, General Castellaw talked about Syria, for example, and that's an excellent example, but there's a couple of others too that you probably are very familiar with, and that certainly the United States military is familiar with, and is preparing for operations in these areas. One is Africa. Africa, especially the area in the Sahara, is prone to drought and prone to food shortages. And the 2012 uprising in Mali is a prime example of how the drought caused food shortages and then in turn caused the Tuaregs, the nomadic tribes that live in that area, to rise up against the government. And again, accelerant of instability, when they rise up against the government, perhaps it's a religious conflict. It ended up being a manifestation of the uprising. But what was the spark for that was climate change, or at least a major component of it. So we can't ignore that. Again, it's something that shaped this new battle space, an accelerant of instability that we have to plan for. We can't just watch it flat-footed and wait till it happens like we never expected it. It's all about predicting, as General Castellaw properly said, it's about managing the risk. You've got to know what the risk is first. The other area that's very important that we're conducting operations, and oh, by the way, we're also acquiring new capabilities and new acquisitions to deal with it, is littoral operations in South Asia. You're all familiar with Bangladesh. It's one of the lowest coastlines in the world. It's one of the most heavily populated countries in the world. 30% of Bangladesh is prone to inundation, and we're talking about 150 million people who would like to go somewhere else because you can't live in an inundated area. We're not talking about drought here. We're talking about living in water. And we all know that's not possible for folks to live in those situations. So they would like to go somewhere else when they have these big floods. And where they would like to go, because the land routes that exist to them offer them the opportunity just to flee, would be India. India has a 210-mile long fortified border. They regularly shoot people who try to go across that border, and they're not interested in having their own population migration problems. So it produces instability. By the way, that region has two countries that have nuclear weapons. So it's really a problem when you think about climate change and how it produces these effects. It accelerates the instability that's already there. Well, the United States military is one of those in the world, probably the first one to react to these situations. We do it all the time. It's unlikely that we're going to stop doing that because we have the resources to do it and because we care, therefore we have to plan for it. Again, it comes back to dealing with facts on the ground. It comes back to being ready to deal with a new battle space. And it comes back to managing risk, which is something the military does all the time. Business does that too, but the military has to manage risk. It's the essential element of strategy. You can't solve all the problems, but you can manage the risk. Your responsibility as a leader in the military is to manage the risk so you can accomplish the mission and bring your troops home so that they can accomplish it again. U.S. military gets it. They understand that it's really about readiness. It's really about managing risk. I'd like to pass it back now to General Castellaw and finish talking a little bit about climate change. Thank you.
When I left the Marine Corps in 2008, I came back here to Tennessee. And again, I had told my wife, hey, 3 years, we're back on the farm, 36 years later. So I go back to my farm, and I get a job working for a company that's got a 10,000-acre farming operation. And I said, man, this is great. I can get out there and resume my farming operation and get with it. So I went down there and I walked into one of the tractors, and darn, it had more compute capability than the airplane I flew. Automatic steer, GPS, and I never thought about a tractor driver not having to worry about getting lost, but he did. And then, you know, these planners were smarter than the people operating them. You know, you put this script program in them, and it takes the GPS, and it'll plant within a few centimeters of where you want it to, where you programmed it to, based on the GPS capability. And I started talking to the farmers, and it once again reinforced within me, you know, my admiration for those who till the soil. And what this old farmer, who's 70 years old, talked about was how it was important for him to understand this advanced technology, because he was going to have to feed another 1.5 billion people here pretty soon. And as you look at what agriculture has done, you know, we've had about 2 20-year periods out of the last 40 years where we sort of doubled our production capability as we've increased the number of people. We're going to have to continue to do that. And what's going to make it even more challenging is climate change. You know, one of the first things I did when I got back also is I subscribed to Progressive Farmer, you know, the Bible of farmers. And I'd open it up and I'd read in there about the need to improve the conservation measures. Okay, now this is the Progressive Farmer. It's not a leftist journal. It's the Progressive Farmer, and it says because thunderstorms are getting more intense than they have been in the past, and it's causing more erosion of the soil. And so we had to do a better job of conserving that soil because of the increase in the intensity. And the other thing is we need to do some more tweaking on the seeds that we plant. We need to make them more temperature tolerant. We need to make them more drought resistant. And oh, by the way, if it's a wet year like this one, it's got to be more moisture tolerant. So we're seeing farmers try to manage the risk to climate change because they know they've got to feed these other 1.5 billion people by doing these type of things. And it's going to have an impact on us here in Tennessee and the Mid-South if we don't continue to manage that risk, to take advantage of technology, and also, oh, by the way, let's reduce our footprint, just like FedEx talked about. Because the bottom line here is we're talking about how do we feed and clothe the additional people of this world. It's not something abstract. I'm not talking about being an alarmist. In the military, what's prized is your ability to operate under stress, to manage risk, come up with measures of dealing with it, and then execute. And that's what we're talking about here. What can we do to manage the risk, to meet the challenges that we're talking about tonight, and to ensure, you know, that we're successful in the future. I think, you know, also when I was here, I played freshman basketball. I thought I was pretty good. I was the shortest guy on the team. In the last game of the season, we were playing Murray State, and I got to start. I said, man, I'm doing good. And it wasn't too long after the season ended, about a week later, the coach comes up and says, hey, I think you ought to play football. needless to say, I didn't come back next year. But I think we're going to stop now and open it up for any questions you might have. And the reason I was talking about that is because I know we've got the tournament coming up here in just a little bit, the final game.
So I think we've got some time though, before the game starts, and definitely before it gets into the part you want to get back for. To open it up for questions, open it up for Q&A, comments, ideas, any other thoughts or actions or anything like that. This is, you all are the second of about 10 region city tour that we're doing. Our first one was Pittsburgh. Here we are in western Tennessee. We're going to be going all around the country, Texas, to South Carolina, to Colorado, to Arizona. And part of what we want to do is not just talk at you. We want to hear back from you as well. So that's why we've collected your email addresses, and we want to make sure that you stay in touch with us and go to our website and hear about what we're doing, and we want to hear from you as well. So there's lots of ways to do that. Twitter, the quarterback there has been running our Twitter feed, NatSecClimate, at NatSecClimate. So follow that, interact with us that way. But the easiest way right now is just to raise your hand. So, so what can we do for you? In the back, yeah.
I have a comment or two and then a question. I usually ask my friends from overseas, we have quite a few international students here, what surprised them the most. And one of them told me, of course, he thought Martin was going to be maybe 7 or 8 million. And he was from Shenyang, China, and he told me when I visited there, he said, this is a small town, only 7 million. And I said, well, wait till you get to Martin. I said, you will not get lost. But I asked him what surprised them the most in terms of the United States and Martin in particular. And he told me he went outside at night and looked and saw stars, which indicate the pollution problems that that particular country faces. One of the questions that I have in mind is the new countries, the developing countries now are telling the United States and Europe, you want us to cut back on pollution when you have already gained your high standard of living. How do we answer that particular comment?
So why don't I start and you all can jump in if you want.
He always asks us tough questions.
Tough question. Yeah. Lead us off with a tough one. So I think you start by answering that countries do what's in their interests. Countries don't act altruistically. Nations don't act altruistically. Nations act in their own interests. You mentioned pollution. Now, there's not it's not direct line. The pollutants that are caused by haze are different than the pollutants that cause global warming. But there is a clear link between those, coal power plants and the like. So the Chinese government knows they have a problem with pollution, knows they have to reduce that. And they know that they have a problem with climate change as well. ASP did a study last year called the Global Security Defense Index that looked at how militaries and nations around the world see climate change. They list it as a security threat. China does. China lists it as a security threat. Their military establishment is beginning to look at the effects of climate change. I've talked with some Chinese scholars working on this issue. And they know it's a problem, and so they know, and they also know that they're the #1 polluter in the world. Now, this is not something that they can simply just say, oh, you did this, and you have to do something about it. So they're beginning to move, and they're beginning to get going on it. I'd only say, though, that it starts with American leadership. Anything that's real, that happens in the world, starts with American leadership. whether you're talking about the Marshall Plan or the World Bank or any of the great things that happen in the world, the United States starts it, then we get the rest of the world to join us. If we're waiting for everybody else to lead, I don't think that's the way to go.
Well, I think, as Andrew said, you act in your own self-interest. I think that the greatest impact right now is going to be on the third world countries. John talked about the situation in Bangladesh. I mean, that is set up to be a real tragedy with the rise in ocean levels. Other islands out in the Pacific face the same thing. We're starting to see, again, the impact in Africa. I'll always remember I went to Chad, which is in the center of Africa. It's mostly a desert country. It's got one river that goes down through it, and on Sundays, just about everybody that lives in the country is down on the river, washing their clothes, washing themselves, and taking water up out for the week. It doesn't take much imagination to know what's going to happen. There's a Lake Chad, which feeds it, continues to dry up, and what effect the continued reduction in the flow of the Chari River is going to mean to the nation of Chad. So I think it's in their self-interest also to cooperate on this.
I would only say, as an American, I don't think we should apologize to anybody for the level of prosperity that we've achieved. That's my first comment to somebody that would object to what the United States or any other country in the West is doing. So that's obviously an incomplete response, but that's my gut response. But my second response to that is we don't have a choice. And we have to be clear-eyed about what our challenges are in the future. It is, as Andrew said, in our interest to work towards a future where we know what the risks are with climate change, and we do what we can now so we're not like flat-footed in 10 years. And we should encourage other countries, again, as Andrew said, we should be a leader in that. We shouldn't discourage other countries from taking a lead. I mean, we're not about trying to keep people down. We're about trying to help other people for all good reasons. And one way we can help other countries deal with the very real facts of climate change is to encourage them to act in their interest to address it as well. So that'd be my response. I don't know if that would be appreciated diplomatically, but you know what? I bet it would be.
I thought you were a diplomat, John.
Go back here.
This is April 2014. Do you feel better or worse about the Congress addressing the issue than you did in April of 2012?
You put it this way for
I feel worse. I mean, I'm just keeping it real. I think trying to expect anything from Washington in 2014 is stupid. But I do think that we need to be pressing our legislators, regardless of whether they listen, to stay based on facts. And I keep it to comments about the United States military because that's really kind of my area. I appreciate support in Congress and would argue would talk to senators and congressmen and do whenever I have the chance to tell them, let's appreciate and support what the U.S. military is doing to prepare for the battle space. And I'll just give you an example of a program that the Army's doing that is important and will help us deal with the battle space and deal with the uncertainty in defense spending right now. And it's a program called Net Zero, where the Army selects installations to have a goal by 2030 of producing as much energy as they consume. And you ask and properly, what does that have to do with the battle space? It has everything to do with the battle space because we don't have funds to waste on energy that we could be saving by redirecting our programs so that our installations can operate efficiently. And it's not a knee-jerk response, it is a programmed, long-term response that makes every bit of sense for commanders to look at their installations, determine where the waste is, eliminate the waste, and then come up with solutions to try to save money so we can spend money on equipping our troops as opposed to wasting it on programs. And that's what I would, it's a long way of saying, but I think it's really important to mention in the context of Congress, y'all have a role in that too, a very important role as constituents. And that's just one program that the military is doing. I won't spend as much time talking about it, but another program the military is doing that our legislators can support, the U.S. Navy is saving 3% fuel cost on every ship that burns conventional fuel by putting stern flaps on the ships. Very simple, mechanical. All it does is smooth out the wake. It means the ship can steam through water more effectively. Very, very low-tech solution, saving 3% fuel cost per ship per year. Well, if it's just one ship, that's, you can say that's pretty important. It's probably going to save several $100,000. Multiply that by the 200 or so conventional fuel-burning ships in the fleet, you're saving, well, let's see, my math's not that good, but you could probably figure that out. Very big savings program. Our legislators, many of them know those things, but they really need to get in tune with what their United States military, what your United States military is already doing to come to terms with climate change and the need to come up with more efficient use of the energy we have. Hope that addresses your question.
You think that those flaps would work on a fast boat, John?
So I worked for many years in Congress, and so I guess I should jump in on that a little bit. What I would say is that Congress is a lagging indicator. Members of Congress, right now, they don't know what the public wants. The public has been so whiplashed back and forth and back and forth. We would get just the most phone calls on certain things that come up, and you'd get this wave of phone calls that would come in, and you'd have to act on it. And that's gotten worse since I left. I left in 2008, 6 years ago. You have a number of legislators who've been elected since then who have come in opposing things like this. But most of the other ones who are there really are, they're there and they're listening to their constituents. So that's why we're out here, not in Washington, talking to members of Congress. They don't want to hear from us, they want to hear from you. And so if this is an issue that you care about, you should let them know. You should let them know about any issue you care about. It's not just this one, it's whatever you care about. They are actually very responsive to you. And I get this incredulous look when I tell people this. But if you call up your member of Congress's office, you're going to get a phone call back. And it may not be from the member of Congress, it won't be from the member of Congress, it'll be from somebody like me. But that somebody like me has the ability, they will write it down, we'll tell you what you're asking about, what you care about. And that trickles up, that gets to the member of Congress. So, if you say, I don't like it when people say, oh, Congress is so screwed up. You elect them, I elected them. They're screwed up because the country right now is screwed up and we can't figure out what we want. So once we start getting there, and once they start hearing from you, then they're going to get there. So maybe that's a little harsh on my part, but we need to start thinking about, and the problem is that the only people who call members of Congress are the really super engaged ones on the far right or the far left. And so if you don't think you're there, and you don't care that much, they're not going to hear from you. Well, you know, that's on you. I email my member of Congress. You know, this is your duty as an American. Be involved.
So you mentioned Asia and parts of the Arctic and Africa. What about Central and South America? Are there battle spaces there that are concerned with climate change or not really?
Absolutely. One that comes to mind most readily is the Caribbean and Central America. I mean, maybe because I share that battle space beyond the Gulf Coast, but seriously, yeah, it happens. It happens all the time. I mean, you can't take your eye off the Weather Channel where I live, and they can't either. I mean, they don't have the Weather Channel. I guess they have their equivalent, but maybe we're lucky.
You're talking just hurricanes.
Well, I'm talking severe weather, yeah, and I'm talking littoral areas because that's prone to flooding, and there are areas of South America that are prone to drought. So it is shared with Central and South America, but I think the greatest area of concern for us in the United States, if nothing else because of the proximity, is the Caribbean and Central America and the effect of severe weather there.
I think one of the things is, I believe Brazil last year, for the first time, exceeded the United States in exporting corn. And right now, of course, the season's full swing down on the other side of the hemisphere, but weather is impacting the crop down there this year. They've been having some issues, I think, the last couple of years with drought, and because of the role that Brazil and some of the other South American countries have played in the export of commodities now, is what's happening weather-wise down there is becoming much more of an interest for all of us, and I think just like here, that you're starting to see that. I think one of the things that confuses everybody, and it confuses me, of course, I'm easily confusable, but is the randomness, or at least to me, of what's going on now in terms of the impacts, temperatures, and other weather conditions right now. And I think that is playing a role in how some of us are interpreting what's going on.
Yeah, and one more I would add to that is Peru. One of the things that's changing fastest is tropical glaciers, and you know the glaciers in the Andes in Peru that feed cities like Lima and Cusco are melting very fast, and if those become just a seasonal thing, then it's only seasonal water supplies, and major cities lose their water supplies in the dry season, and that's a big difference and a big problem. There's the issue, the interesting thing for an analyst like me is that, like General Castellaw said, there are almost random amounts of things that can happen and can talk about. For years, I had talked about, we had talked about the problems in Pakistan from climate change, but we talked about it in terms of too little water, drought. And then it turned out it was too much water. Just the Indus River overflowing its banks for a couple of years now running. And causing real problems, and that's one of the real difficulties of this, is that it's the change, and like I said, we know certain things about trends, but scientists can't predict every sort of thing. If they could, we'd know what the weather was like tomorrow. But we have another one, right? That's right.
Yeah, as
represent everything that you talked about today. We have a geoscience group that's meteorologists, climatologists, and we have the agriculture group. We actually even have the military group. We have a number of cadets and instructors from Army ROTC here tonight. And the one thing that probably drives me the most crazy in this whole issue is actually the farmers themselves. Most of them that I run into don't believe it. Even though they experience it. 2 years ago we had a terrible drought. Last year we had a really good year. This year is starting out kind of wet. How do we do a better job at convincing them that this isn't just a trend? That's pretty much what I always get told. Oh, it's just a trend. We'll come back, and it's the thing that drives me the most crazy because look at all the scientific evidence. You show some of it today. There's no doubt that there's an issue. But how do you convince them that there's a problem?
Well, I think that, again, I talked about the progressive farmer that you're seeing in farm publications, acknowledgement of the change. There's not a lot of talk about, whether it's man-made or not, but there's certainly acknowledgement that it's changed, and that the situation, the storms, with the drought, with the floods are more extreme. What I found is the farming community is divided into about 50-50. You got about 50% who are seem to be more in tune with the science of what's going on, and then you got 50% that are more into their feelings about this being a lot of political stuff rather than science. So I think as we continue, that growth numbers, percentages will go up. I tell you what always comes back to my mind, and please forgive me for how I describe this, but I used to raise hogs. And what I found out is, you have an area where you've got hogs running. You get to a certain level of that environment that the hogs are operating in, comes to waste, rooting up and everything, then that micro ecosystem collapses. I take that and I expand it to what we're talking about in the larger area of the world. We talked about from 5 million to 7 billion people. We talked about all the industry that's going on, about all the stuff that's going on. It's hard for me, based on just that observation about how you can't overpower ecosystems, that you can't scale it up to what we're seeing today. So based on my experiences as a farmer, I believe the science is right, and I think we're gaining ground. It's a battle, but more and more every day you're understanding what's going on.
Well, I'm not a farmer, but I have family that farms, and in fact, my family farm is in western Kentucky, not far from Bowling Green, so that's not too far from here. And my uncle, who owns that farm, we've had discussions about this, and I love him. I mean, I really do, and we don't completely agree, but we don't have to, because we kick back and drink some bourbon together and go fishing and get some bass and stuff, and it's just a great time. But here's the thing, and I think this is part of the discussion, silent part of the discussion, because it hinders our ability to deal with this reality of climate change, and that is apathy. And you can't. How do you fix that? I mean, and again, I love my uncle. This is not a criticism at all. This is just the way things are. And he's worried about the next time he sees his grandkids, and maybe his wife is ill, and his truck may be breaking down. He doesn't have time to think about this stuff. And that's not because he's a bad person. He's a good person. But I think that's the case with a lot of folks. And this isn't, it is still an arcane subject. I mean, you, because you're able to, and you have the energy and the intellect and the motivation to do so, you've invested your professions in trying to understand this. Some of us because we're in the military, because we want to accomplish the mission. Some of us because we're academics and we want to shed light on a real situation, and we want to inspire young people to apply themselves similarly to solving a problem. But life gets in the way for most folks, and you know what I'm talking about. And so you've got to, you can't stop fighting the good fight, shedding light on the situation, doing what you know is right, trying to bring folks information so they can process it. But we also have to be patient, and I mean in a loving way, with those who maybe don't completely understand, because they got life in the way, and God bless them for what they do. So I'm not being critical, but I just think we need to step back and say, okay, what are most folks dealing with? And that, you know, apathy is perhaps even an unkind way to think about it, but I think it's very real. We got to move forward, you know, and that's a challenge. You know, I don't have the answers. I just think that we got to recognize that's an issue for a lot of folks.
Why don't we actually do one more, but I want to see if we can get a question from a student instead of from all of our professors. So let's see, can we get an undergrad who wants to ask a question, a good one here before we close up and send you all to the basketball game.
I want to say thank you all for coming to this university. Despite the fact that we're in the middle of nowhere.
You're from Memphis?
Yes. The military and our U.S. military has always shown itself to be a little bit further advanced than the general population and throughout our history. And what General Adams talked about today about the fact that the military is actually, General Castellaw as well, the military has moved forward as far as how it handles things on the battlefield to make itself more efficient, run smoothly, like eliminating things that are going to be detriments to our climate as well as our lives and everything else that comes along with it. Question one is, why do you think that it is the military has the necessity to be further advanced? Number two, how long do you think it will take for the rest of the population to finally see light as far as what's going on with climate change and why we need to affect our changes and take advantage of the things that we have to make our lives and the future of our country and our world better? I repeat the question.
A good question. The military, I think, from the beginning, and again, I'm a proud alumni of the ROTC program here at UT Martin. I switched over to Marines before I graduated for my commission, but starting with cadets, what the military does is teach you what we've tried to say is one of the main tenets here is to do objective analysis of what the situation is. And so, you know, when the Navy is making plans to move the Arctic, the Army is looking at how humanitarian operations are going to be conducted in Bangladesh. The Marine Corps is having a healthy presence in Africa, and the Air Force is looking at how they're going to be able to support all these operations worldwide. It's based on analysis of what the mission is and what the environment is they're going to be operating on, and it's just the basic way that the military does business. It's mission first, people always, to borrow an Air Force term, and so it's our culture. How we do things. When will everybody else, I think, is we continue to have Sandy's, we continue to have the Philippines, we continue to have to deal with drought and floods here in the heartland that people will start to think about, where we are and where we might be going, and when you think about things and get engaged, and usually your thought processes will lead you to a practical ending. So, is that going to be 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15? I don't know. I hope it's sooner rather than later.
I'll just echo what John Castellaw said, but add also that the military, I mean, yes, the whole notion of conducting a strategy is to manage risk, but the consequences of failure for the military, and there are other professions with which we share this, but the consequences of failure for the military are disastrous. It has a way of focusing you. So you can't afford not to be ready. You can't afford not to plan for the likely battle space that you're going to face, because the consequences are the destruction of the nation. There's no choice. You have to plan for that. And so I think that's what the military does. And then again, to echo what John Castellaw said, and I just use my own battle space as an example on the Florida Gulf Coast. We get it. And I've got a few neighbors who lived in New Orleans and have come to live in Pensacola. God knows why, because we're going to get the same hurricanes they did. But I'm just kidding. We wanted to stay in the same area, and we were happy to have them as neighbors. But Katrina really made a huge impact on Louisiana and the whole Gulf Coast. And I think that's what we're talking, as John Castellaw said, that's probably what we're talking about. It's just going to take some time. Folks in New Jersey are believers, right? And I think y'all are getting your fair amount of severe weather here too. Now, I don't wish ill on anyone. But I mean, that disaster does focus you. And that's what we're going to face until we come to terms with severe weather that we're having in the United States.
Well, thank you all for your time. Thank you for coming out tonight. If there's any follow-ups, hit our email, hit our website, talk to us after, give us a call your congressman.